Hey guys, I just wanted to do this episode review of an episode that dropped today with the rest of the season that it belongs to. And the episode is called Dark Awakening, and it's from Season 3 of Transformers Generation 1. Now the reason I say it dropped with the rest of the season this week is because, as I talked about in the previous video, Hasbro Pulse that is, has been, in the past several weeks, been dropping seasonal runs of Generation 1 Transformers on the YouTube channel. And as far as I know right now, they are ad-free. There are no ads as of right now. And it just started 2 weeks ago with Season 1, then it progressed with Season 2 last week, and now it's Season 3, and then I would assume Season 4, or 3.5 as some fans would call it, the rebirth, is going to conclude next week. And then they might eventually put Beast Wars on there as well. But Dark Awakening, guys, definitely lives up to at least one word in its title. It is dark. Basically, long story short, it involves the first return of Optimus Prime in Season 3. Basically, the premise is that the Decepticons, with the aid of the Quintessons, has tracked down Rodimus, Ultra Magnus, Cup, RC, Spike, and Daniel, and to avoid them, they escape in a life pod, basically a miniature spaceship, making them think, just like in the movie, they had, the Decepticons had destroyed them, but, Galvatron wants to make sure this time around whether it's true or not. And while they're traveling, and, that being the Autobots in this life pod, which has very, very limited amenities, if you will, like, communication, oxygen, and all that, they try to figure out what the next move will be to try to survive over maybe the next couple of months or something like that. And that's when they notice this big floating thing, floating in the middle of space where they can dock at. The Decepticons also notice it as well, and what we as a viewer eventually find out when we go into the do kind of transition is basically it's a tomb, it's a mausoleum that the Autobots had created after the Great War, which by the sounds of it is the battle on Autobot City in the 1986 movie. Although it could also replicate, or not replicate, but it could also mean and basically represent other Autobots that they lost prior to that. But they mention the Autobots they lost during it, mostly Optimus Prime, all being in this mausoleum. So, you basically think to yourself, well, how is this going to come into play, right? Well, basically, when they get there, Daniel decides to wander off. He looks at all the burial areas, basically the burial chambers, if you will, for all the Autobots. Sorry if I paused there for a second. I was trying to think about what I was going to say next. But he walks by all the burial sections, burial chambers for all the Autobots that died in the movie. Mostly 3 out of the 4 he mentions who died on the ship coming to Autobot City. Ironhide, that being Ironhide, Ratchet, and Prowl. But then he gets to Huffer, who you wouldn't think had died in the movie, but this probably does coincide, or correlate, if you will, with some of the original ideas they had pinned and pitched to be put in the movie that were unfortunately cut. Now, basically, to get to the point here, they do encounter Optimus. First Daniel does, and then Daniel, just scared out of his wits, runs into a door which houses another dead Autobot, which I'm assuming is Windcharger, but the design is a little bit different, but maybe that's because he's deteriorating because of the chest area. And he basically mentions that he bumped into Optimus Prime. So this gets Rodimus Prime's curiosity up. He and the others go check the burial, the casket basically where he's supposed to be, and they notice he's not there. So after they notice he's not there, they end up getting attacked by the Decepticons who followed them in, but then they are rescued by Optimus Prime. But what's funny is, unbeknownst to them, is they don't see that Optimus is acting a little strange. Like he's still himself, but there's something a little off. And Rodimus, and this is one of the subplots of the entire season, is a very reluctant leader. Like he understands that this is part of his destiny, whether he wants to accept it or not. And if he sees any opportunity to potentially pass the Matrix on to somebody more worthy in his mind, or maybe potentially pass it back to a previous leader, he's going to take it. And he does just that when he notices Optimus is alive. But again, he and the others don't kind of see that something's a little off about Optimus. And eventually we find out that it was the Quintessons, the ones that had helped the Decepticons, track down the Autobots, and Spike and Daniel, that it was the Quintessons that had infiltrated the mausoleum. They had infiltrated the mausoleum. They had taken Optimus out of his body, out of his casket, revived him, and turned him basically into an almost mindless zombie with a few remnants of his memory and all that. But unbeknownst to them, what they didn't plan for, that being the Quintessons, is, Rodimus wanting to pass the Matrix back to Optimus, and that's what he does. He passes it back to Optimus, and basically the Matrix is now fighting the control that the Quintessons have over Optimus to try to get him back to normal. And this is kind of back and forth. You notice this back and forth throughout the episode. And it's because of this, the writers, here's the thing about the writers with this episode. Yeah, they brought him back, but they definitely wanted to put a bow, if you will, like a black bow, a black rose bow on the G1 characters, being axed off. So what did they do? What did they do with that? They decide that since Optimus is still fighting the control of the Quintessons, now that he has the Matrix back within him and Rodimus is back to being Hot Rod, basically what happens is he ends up causing the mausoleum to self-destruct. He escapes on a makeshift plane that he made, or the Quintessons made for him, back to Cybertron, and the others are left to kind of pick up any scraps they can to make a, basically a last minute, improvisation or operation, if you will, as Ultra Magnus calls it, improvisation, if you will, basically a makeshift, ship to get them back to Cybertron. So, long story short, and I know I just said that, but long story short, basically, this is all basically part of a plan by the Quintessons. This is all part of a plan by the Quintessons to take out the Autobots and reclaim Cybertron. This is all part of this master plan, and it involves, basically turning Optimus into a Zombot, if you will. But again, what they didn't account for was the Matrix being involved and basically overriding their control on him, which eventually does happen because once, Hot Rod, RC, Ultra Magnus, and all of them get back to, back to Cybertron, they find out from the Dinobots that Optimus, who'd already gotten there before them and basically had lied about, them dying to the others, they basically find out that he took the entire fleet to this unknown destination where the Quintessons are supposed to be, not knowing that it's a trap. And basically, when they get there, you start seeing all these Autobot planes going down. Some look like power glides, some look like aerial bots, but we could just probably assume they're just duplicates, coloring errors and all that. But the thing is, you start seeing all this take place, right? And it's only after they board the flagship, because once it's reported to Optimus, oh, they're alive and everything, that's when you start seeing more of that struggle with the Matrix, against the Quintessons' control taking over. So again, it's basically a struggle for Optimus because he's trying to be himself, but he's also trying to, follow through on the orders the Quintessons gave him. So in the climax, basically, Hot Rod, like I said, they get aboard the flagship. Hot Rod confronts Optimus. They fight, and it gets to a point where Optimus's left arm or right arm falls right off. It's like he gets, kicked by Hot Rod because Hot Rod's trying to fight for his life against an Optimus that he says is very, very sick. Not understanding that Optimus is pretty much an undead guy right now. So, basically they fight to a point that when Optimus, gets, kicked across the room to a wall, his arm comes off, and, Optimus kicks him back, and just when it looks like he's about to finish Hot Rod off, because Hot Rod didn't finish him off, that's when the Matrix starts to leak through his chest a little bit, and that's when, you know, the override that, or the control the Quintessons have gets overridden, and, you know, Optimus becomes himself again, and he passes the Matrix back to Hot Rod, explaining that they turned him into a weapon. The monsters, the Quintessons, turned him into a weapon to, you know, carry out their evil deeds. So, you know, he passes it back to Hot Rod, who becomes Rodimus again, and they escape the flagship, if you will, because it's getting blown to pieces. Optimus gives his one last order to the Autobots to return to Cybertron, in which they do, but he is still aboard the flagship, heading towards the bomb, the detonator that the Quintessons had set originally for the Autobots. And, you know, they basically try to fire on the flagship to prevent it from crashing into it. And they can't believe what they're seeing, that being the Quintessons, that anybody could survive that any Autobot could survive that, because the ship's still flying, and they're thinking there's no way an Autobot could survive that, or no ordinary Autobot could survive that. But here's the thing, they forget that the Autobot that's, or not forget, but the one thing they're not realizing is the Autobot that's flying it is Optimus. And basically, just like earlier in the episode where the writers really wanted to put a bow onto the fact that, you know, the season 1 and 2 characters were gone, you know, when the mausoleum blew up, they wanted to do the same here with Optimus, but also rectify what happened in the movie. And what I mean by rectify is basically say this is who Optimus is, that he's willing to sacrifice himself to save those he cares for, those that he loves. And, you know, we see that when he didn't shoot Megatron, when he was holding Hot Rod, when Hot Rod got in the way to try to prevent Megatron from getting the gun or something like that in the movie. And we see that here at the end of Dark Awakening. Now, what's interesting about Dark Awakening is when after Optimus sacrifices himself by saying, after, you know, well, basically after Optimus sacrifices himself after saying to all are one, and he basically, you know, crashes right into the detonator, the asteroid where the detonator is, and blows up. You know, you see the other Autobots, you know, saying goodbye to him. Like you see Cup saying goodbye, old friend. You see Ultra Magnus saying this Nova will be his memorial. You see Daniel crying and being comforted by his dad in RC. You see Hot Rod saying, I don't know if I'm going to be the leader you were, but I'm going to try. And then as they're flying off, you see this picture of Optimus in the sky, and you hear Rodimus going, so long, Prime. And what's interesting about that is that was the original ending, and you do get that in the original, you do get that in the DVD set by Shout Factory, and I think you even get that in the Rhino set as well, as originally aired. Because what happens later on is they re-air it for the first time. They do a rerun of it the first time ever later on, and instead of you hearing Rodimus saying "so long, Prime," you hear Ultra Magnus say his word, you know, his line, but then you hear the narrator do a voiceover saying, "But is this really the end of Optimus Prime? Tune in tomorrow for the exciting episode, The Return of Optimus Prime." And that was really crazy. Well, not crazy, but that was really interesting. That they basically altered and basically swapped in continuity an episode of, you know, season 3 to coincide with a newer episode that they made, a newer 2-part finale that they had made because of the response parents and kids were having towards the death of Optimus in the movie, and probably more so now with Dark Awakening, even though they tried to rectify what they did in the movie with Dark Awakening. So yeah, Dark Awakening has not one but 2 endings. It has the original and it has the alternate narrator ending, which is really cool. So you could view it any which way. You could view it as originally intended, or you can view it, you know, as the way that they had altered it, that they had changed it in continuity, if you will. But yeah, if you haven't seen Dark Awakening yet, I'd suggest checking it out. Again, Season 3 of Transformers Generation 1 is currently on the YouTube channel for Hasbro Pulse. I would suggest watching it. I think you'll really enjoy it. And that's all I'm going to say, guys. So, till next time, God bless, take care, live chat during the premiere, comment down below, like the video, check out my Teespring store for merchandise. We're growing it as much as I can. I'm growing it as much as I can. You know, trying to come up with some ideas and everything for what to put in merch next, if you will. But yeah, let me know what your thoughts are on Dark Awakening. What did you feel about it the first time you saw it? How did you feel about it when they reran it, but they altered the ending to make it, you know, now take place before the return of Optimus? What are your thoughts? Comment down below. Like I said, live chat during the premiere. Like the video. Check out Teespring. And I'm out.